Welcome to another episode of the Nitschke podcast. As always, today's episode is brought to you by us, the team at Nitschke Real Estate. We are handling all aspects of real estate for all of our clients in the Adelaide Hills and the wider Fleurieu Peninsula, whether you're looking at buying, selling, renting or investing. Our friendly team has you covered. So certainly you can reach out to us anytime, no matter what stage in the property journey you're at. And one of the best ways to do that is either to message our social media channels if you're watching there today, or otherwise just head to our website, which is www.nitschke.com.au. Thanks for tuning in today. Today's episode, we're telling you everything you need to know about selling an investment property. And one of the first places to start at the same time as speaking to us from a property market point of view is that you definitely need to reach out to your financial planner and also your accountant just to kind of plan through the implications of a potential sale on your broader personal planning and structures and things you've got going on. So you want to make sure that it fits in well with your retirement planning, with your financial planner, and making sure that the timing of this is the right time for you. And then you also then, from an accountant point of view, really need to work out the implications from a tax perspective, whether that's capital gains tax or just simply your tax for the current financial year and beyond. So definitely do that. That might seem really obvious. You'd be surprised how many clients try and do it the other way around, where they get excited, put the property on the market, and then try and figure out the tax bit later. Don't do that. You know, it's really smart to do this in the right sequence. Get all your ducks in a row, and then it can be a really successful sale from there. So that's definitely the first tip. And then the next question that is really important that you're going to come up with and really should focus on is you really need to ask yourself, can I afford to sell my investment property vacant without a tenant? Or do I need to keep the tenant in place? If you can sell your investment property with no tenant, the sale will be much better. To me, it's that simple. If you can afford to do that, you absolutely should. And I understand, and I definitely get it, that not all sales can be strategic. You know, sometimes life happens. You know, I've certainly been thrown my fair share of curveballs. I get it. You can't plan everything, but ideally in a perfect world, if you can plan the sale of your investment property with a period of a few months, maybe up to 4 or even 5 months of no rent, depending on what needs to be done to the property once the tenants move out, it will be a better outcome for you. And sometimes, you know, like I was talking about this with a client only yesterday, they were a little bit concerned about, you know, having the property sit vacant. And we actually started to break down some of the numbers, and I don't think they really looked at it. And in their case, they were looking at a property that would probably rent for about $400 a week. So across a month, after, you know, management fees are taken out and, you know, various outgoings that they might have from time to time, they're probably looking at roughly $1,000 a month that they would miss out on if they didn't have a tenant in place when they sold. And so we kind of worked that out and said, okay, that's probably going to be $3,000 to $4,000 in the current market. And then we weighed that up against what the potential sale price could be. And it was a no-brainer to actually look at getting started without a tenant in place, presenting the property beautifully, staging and getting things happening. I know that's not an option for everyone, but it's definitely my first recommendation. But if you can't afford to sell the property vacant, selling a property with a tenant in place, there's some steps you really need to be aware of and understand. So one of them is that it's a message that I recommend and say to every landlord that's in this position. You need to remember that whilst it's your house, it's your property, it's the tenant's home. And so we need to kind of work together. Yes, there's some legal requirements, but there's also just some general integrity and well-being things to be aware of to try and show a degree of empathy to the tenant situation and working with them, particularly if they've been a long-term tenant. You really want to conclude that chapter in your relationship with them. It is a partnership after all. You want to try and work together. So one of the things to be aware of is if you've just let your property to a brand new tenant, you actually can't put the property on the market for a period of 6 months in South Australia. If you do that inside of the 6 months, you run the risk that the tenants could give notice and move out without penalty anyway. And to be honest, it's a bit of a dog act to do that. Like, if you're really not letting the tenants know your intention when you're starting them moving into the property, I just don't think that that's a reasonable thing to do. I think that you really should kind of work in with the tenants to explain what your intentions are going to be. Again, I understand that life happens, curveballs come up. You might be going through a separation. You might have had an unexpected job change or a need to sell the property. It could be an economic reason, but still try and work in with partnerships. So if it's a brand new tenant, you can't actually do that in the first 6 months. Otherwise, you negate the benefit of having the lease anyway. If it's a relet, meaning that you've had a tenant, say, in your property for about 12 months, and then you've offered them another lease, you don't have the same restriction. But seriously, if you're going to sell the property and you know that when you're looking at renewing the lease, have some integrity to sort of have that conversation with the tenant and talk them through what your intentions are going to be. You might be surprised, like in a number of cases, one of the first moves we do if an owner can't sell the property vacant is if you've got a long-term tenant in place, they might actually be interested in buying it. So, I mean, you know, when they go to speak to their mortgage broker, part of their loan application could actually be their tenancy ledger and how consistently they've been paying the rent. So it's definitely a good move to start with offering it to the tenant. But if it's a relet and you're deciding to sell, again, I would actually recommend that 6-month rule still applies. Even though it's not a legal requirement, there's probably a level of an integrity in there and good faith that if the tenant's been offered a 12-month lease, they would have been talking with your property manager and said, hey, you know, so does this mean that the owner's not selling? And the property manager, because they're not aware of your intentions, is going, yeah, no, they're definitely not. They love you. They think you're a great tenant. Oh, awesome, great. We'll sign it quickly. We're so happy here. Imagine then 2 or 3 weeks later or 2 months later, they get a phone call, you know, to say that it's going on the market. So just be really aware of that if you can. So I think generally speaking, if you've got a tenant in place, maybe wait to at least 6 months to go in the lease, not the full 12. Otherwise, you will create some conflict. Once that's up and running and you've cleared those windows, then you do need to give written notice to your tenant to let them know your intentions to sell and that you've engaged an agent. And that agent can't do anything for 2 weeks. But after that 2-week period, that's when you can start to commence marketing and inspections. And ideally, to try and work in with the tenant. The tenant is allowed to stay in the property when it's on the market, which is not a big deal. Like, what I mean by that, sorry, is during inspections, they're allowed to physically stay. It's up to them whether they choose to vacate when we have an open or a private inspection. And it's important to understand in South Australia that their lease stands when it goes on the market. So if a buyer came along and they wanted to move in, like let's say it's right now, and they wanted to move in by Christmas and the lease was until March, the only way that lease can be terminated is by way of mutual agreement. So it has to be the landlord and the tenant agreeing. And if the tenant really wants to stay out their lease, they will, and they're allowed to do that. So it is a little bit complicated selling a property with a tenant in place. Some landlords think, it would be better because if another investor comes along, then they've got a ready-made tenant. I'd have to say, with the strength of our rental market and the low vacancy rate that we've been enjoying for probably well over 18 months now, it's really not going to be a huge deal for a new landlord to come into a vacant property and land a tenant fairly quickly. So that's just a little bit of an insight as to how you sell an investment property. There's obviously a lot of other nitty-gritty details that are really circumstantial and depends on your situation and also the market, and of course your property and tenants. So please never hesitate to reach out to our team anytime. We are an information resource for you. We're here to help you, and we've had a lot of experience working with many, literally thousands of landlords throughout the Adelaide Hills and Fleurieu region. We're here for you. Reach out to us, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for tuning in.